There were 12 of us to begin with, by Ian Gordon. With thanks to our producers, Ashley Lindsay, Robert Daniel Pickard, Wes Sale, and Cameron Seegers. Chapter 8, False Widow, January 1st, 1990. To the 7 overwrought contestants who awoke on the morning of Monday, January 1st, 1990, in the quarters assigned to the Fair Isle cardigan-wearing man known as Black Garden, the 12 days of Christmas and the notion of a new year couldn't be further from their thoughts. They were tired, each of them having missed out on quality sleep due to the need to cycle what they each felt was an essential vigil. But it had been a double-edged sword. The participants in Murder at Miller's Manor were all well aware that sleep would have been impossible without the vigil, for there was a killer in their midst, a real killer, not some ethereal phantom operating from the shadows, a living, breathing human being composed of flesh and blood, and quite possibly one of them. False Widow was the first to open her eyes that morning. She'd slept in the dress she'd worn for dinner, a black polka-dot affair, and felt, there in the humidity of the crowded bedroom, somewhat exposed. She was a lavish lady, lived life to its fullest. She took every opportunity to socialize, whether the destination was a seedy nightclub on the outskirts of her hometown, Derby, in which inebriated youngsters would grope her in the dark, or the more civilized kind of night out involving fine dining at the Hidden Cat, with co-workers from the council. Stepping over the myriad limbs crisscrossing the carpeted floor, she flung herself into the ensuite, locked the door behind her, and experienced, for the first time in many hours, some semblance of privacy. She emptied her bladder, splashed cold water across her mug, and eyeballed her morning face in the mirror. Despite the lack of sleep and the trepidation coursing through her veins, she looked good. Her skin was supple, and lines were few. There was a grace about her. But still, there was little she could do in terms of properly refreshing herself there in Black Garden's bathroom. And so, once more, she skipped across the bodies in the bedroom, some of which were now coming around, and left the crowded quarters. Entering her own room, which was next door, south along the gallery, she locked herself inside and ran herself a cold shower. Cold water had always held a revitalizing quality for the woman codenamed False Widow, whose real name was Maria Winterbotham. There, under the icy stream, she collected her thoughts, considering the very recent death of her fellow contestant, the erstwhile Green Drake, the man who wore the flashy shirts. She considered the fact that she hadn't even known the man's name, didn't know any of their names, and yet she'd watched him die, the stranger she'd spent so much time with over the preceding days. Maria wasn't a hard lady, but still she'd been surprised at how calm she'd remained following Green Drake's passing. How, in light of all that his death had revealed about the game in which she was now a reluctant participant, she'd managed to keep a level head, whereas in other situations in her life, particularly those involving violent men and unpredictable women, she'd collapsed under the weight of her insecurities. The shower was her haven, her reset switch. Under the cool spray, she was invincible, untouchable. No self-respecting murderer would want to go anywhere near that freezing water. But her appointment with the cubicle couldn't last forever. If Bluebottle's theory of Green Drake's death by poisoning was anything to go by, then, quite possibly, as was implied, she, the False Widow, venomous or not, was the next target. What's with the code names anyway? She mused. Grey Dagger, the Moth. Longhorn, the Beetle. Yellow Jacket, the Wasp. Scarlet Darter, the Dragonfly. Green Drake, the Mayfly. What about the others? What did Nightcrawler represent? New Forest, Black Garden, White Admiral, Andrena? To her mind, only Bluebottle jumped out to her as somewhat obvious. After 10 minutes or so in the shower, her skin had pruned. It was time to get out. She'd dry her hair, change into something comfortable, and join the rest of the contestants downstairs. But unfortunately for the 40-something from Derby, her plans would never come to fruition. Stepping out of the ensuite into the bedroom proper, somebody was waiting for her. She heard the muted notes of a hummed melody first, the drone of something terrible, something rapturously atonal. And then, quite suddenly, a clear plastic bag was thrown over her head and pulled tight. As she puffed and wheezed, seeking oxygen, the towel she'd wrapped around her body fell to the ground. Naked, she struggled with her assailant, fought back valiantly, but her assassin had the advantage. Consciousness fleeting, she caught sight of a familiar face in the freestanding mirror. She knew her killer, but, unfortunately, she also knew that she'd never get the opportunity to share the discovery in the short time she had left to live. Bluebottle's prediction had been absolutely on the money. Greendrake's death, however vague, had implicated False Widow. But her death by suffocation was just the beginning of the murderer's work that morning. It was around 11 a.m. that the remaining 6 contestants came together again in the kitchen. Andrena, New Forest, and White Admiral had been late to the party, each of them having braved time alone in their quarters to recuperate. And when, a little after 11:15, White Admiral, the last to arrive, walked into the kitchen to partake in the consumption of breakfast cereals, it was collectively understood that False Widow, the first to leave Blackgarden's quarters that morning, wouldn't be joining them. Together, the 6 of them, Nightcrawler, White Admiral, Andrena, New Forest, Bluebottle, and Blackgarden, ascended the stairs once again and approached False Widow's bedroom door. Blackgarden knocked. "Are you in there?" he called. There was no reply. He knocked again. "Hello?" he ventured. But still, there was no reply. A tremendous sensation of déjà vu washed over the company like a Mexican wave, as, just as Greendrake had done 2 days earlier, Blackgarden reached out and turned the door handle. It was unlocked. Pushing the door open, the contestants, one by one, crossed the threshold and stepped into a truly nightmarish scene. False Widow, the strikingly beautiful 40-something, lay in 2 pieces on the carpeted floor. Her naked body had been severed at the waist with a pair of garden shears, the offending item carefully propped up against the nearby wall. Blood still trickled from the injury, pooling above and around both the torso and the severed legs. The bag that had been used to suffocate her still covered her face. Both Nightcrawler and New Forest promptly vomited, each of them dropping to the ground like stones. Andrena simply gawped at the spectacle, unable to stop herself from doing so. White Admiral ran out onto the gallery, where he proceeded to slam his fists upon the banister rail, while Bluebottle and Blackgarden, who had both stood at the head of the party, recoiled noiselessly. An agonizing silence ensued. New Forest was the first to notice a number of discarded refuse sacks near the door to the room, sacks that had evidently been fashioned by the killer into grisly garments, worn in order to avoid coming into direct contact with the blood of the victim. Both she and Nightcrawler retreated, taking the shell-shocked Andrena by the arm as they did so, and joined White Admiral on the gallery. But Bluebottle and Blackgarden were eager to learn everything they could from the sight, despite a lack of forensic training and or knowledge of crime scene investigation. Unemotionally, they handled the garden shears, studied the shape and size of the sack garments, viewed the mutilated body from several perspectives, and surmised as to the condition of various items of furniture, namely a chaise longue and a set of drawers, each of which had evidently been toppled in a struggle. Their efforts were born of the desire to know one thing. What did the death of False Widow imply? To whom did her death point? The 6 contestants reunited in the games room later that afternoon, following many an hour of blind wandering and stony silence. Inevitably, a discussion on the subject of False Widow's passing arose. "If I'm honest," New Forest began, her voice a quiver, "I much preferred the clues in the form of dried-up beetles and blood-stained books." "Just what the hell is going on here?" Bluebottle blurted, bypassing New Forest's comment. "If you're in on this, any of you, you need to speak up now. We all know things have gone too far. Nobody will hold you accountable. Just do the right thing and speak up. Now!" White Admiral, who had downed half a bottle of rum, stepped forward. "Not gonna happen, mate," he mumbled. "The thing's fucked. It's all fucked. You, me, you lot," he added, indicating the group at large. "We're all fucked. Why don't you just shut up, you coward?" This from Black Garden. In response to his outburst, White Admiral simply proceeded to glug from the bottle in his hand. "Come on now," said Nightcrawler, the only one among them who appeared to be keeping his cool, despite his initial reaction to the discovery of False Widow's body. "There's somebody else in the house. I know it. I do not believe for a second that any of you guys are involved. I mean, when on earth would any of you had the time to do... He hesitated. "What was done to her?" "Somebody had the time," Bluebottle accused, his eyes scanning all the faces in his immediate vicinity, including Andrena, whose frown was pushing the facial muscles responsible for the expression to the limit. But the argument was short-lived. One by one, the devastated contestants filed out of the games room, until only White Admiral remained, who had fallen into a horizontal, alcohol-induced stupor on the room's large Chesterfield. If the severing of False Widow's body was a clue of some description, it went unresolved by the remaining guests at large who, completely isolated from one another, were assessing the conditions outside as twilight fell upon the estate. The snow was coming down again, transforming the property and the surrounding landscape into little more than a life-size snow globe, its contents having been zealously shaken by a mollycoddled child on Christmas Day. And there, trapped in the bubble, roamed the unwitting contestants, tired and terrified, in the shadow of a demented killer. On the morning of the 2nd, just after 8 a.m., White Admiral awoke in the games room, nursing a headache the size of a mountain. He wandered into the connecting corridor opposite the library, and, sluggishly, his vision hazy, made his way into the grand hall in quest of the water closet by the kitchen. But his journey was interrupted. In the center of the grand hall, between the stairs and the ornate Christmas tree, something lay on the floor. White Admiral squinted, his early morning dazedness denying him clarity of vision. He blinked several times, but still the object was difficult to perceive. He saw a number of items piled together, some small, some large, some round, some oblong. To his watery eyes, the shapes individually looked exactly like the balloon animals his father had so often crafted for him as a boy. But he saw that the balloons were twisted together in the shape of a man. And, as he moved within striking distance of the inflatable figure, he soon realized that what he had mistaken for balloons were in fact the various elements of anatomy that made up a real man, and this poor individual had evidently suffered a violent reaction of some kind. But not the kind of reaction the likes of which Green Drake had suffered. No, this man was swollen to bursting point. It wasn't at all surprising that White Admiral had mistaken the man's bloated appendages for simple balloons. He let out an almighty scream, and from various parts of the manor, the other contestants emerged, each of whom shared in White Admiral's horror as their gazes fell upon the bulging, purple form of Nightcrawler. What the hell happened to him?" cried Andrena, tearing at her hair with both hands. And then her eyes were drawn to a small object by Nightcrawler's side. It was a hypodermic needle. Thanks for listening today, ladies and gents. Be sure to join us again tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for the next part of There Were 12 of Us to Begin With. And until then...